Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics recently released on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service, 1 month after their original print publishing date. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything that I talk about, so be aware. This is your first and only warning that many spoilers lie ahead. Okay, right now I've got a lot of catching up to do because of a long trip that I was away for in March, so I'm actually going to try and catch up on and give all my reactions to DC Comics that got my attention throughout the rest of February 2023. In the last installment of Essential Issues Weekly, I did, I think, the first week or something like that. But anyway, we're going to start by taking a look at comics originally published February 14th and 15th of 2023. And from that group, I've really just chosen one, and that's Lazarus Planet Dark Fate. This is another one-shot in the DC Universe Lazarus Planet event, which I have been just increasingly disinterested in, largely because they're using in these one-shot stories in between the two bookends that are more like full issues containing a main and story that takes up all the pages, in these one-shots between the bookends of this whole event. They're cramming in a bunch of short stories, kind of an anthology type of format, and I'm really not a fan of it because of what that results in, namely that the stories are overly condensed and they just are all exposition, very little character. I mean, that's being hyperbolic, but it's still just not the pacing, the vibe, and the prioritization of story elements and writing elements that I would like. So, Lazarus Planet Dark Fate. The first story features the Huntress, specifically Helena Bertinelli, which means we do have two Huntresses now in the DC Universe, because not long ago in JSA, have I covered this, or have I just read that and not covered it yet? I can't remember. But anyway, in the Jeff Johns JSA series, they're reintroducing the Huntress as the child of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, but in this case from the future, and she's kind of coming back into present day, or actually traveling through JSA history in whatever JSA story that was that I read that in. But so I was surprised. I was like, oh, so they must have gotten rid of the previous Huntress that's been around for a while. That's the son of like a gang leader. So I can't remember what her story is, but anyway, I assume they must have killed her off. But no, DC, this is really interesting to me, and I think pretty welcome. DC right now seems pretty content to have multiple characters using the same name sharing the book of that title. So we've got a Batgirls book, and in the Flash comic, there are multiple characters just named the Flash: Jay Garrick, Wally West, Barry Allen, and a bunch of other speedsters. And in the excuse me, they got a hair in my mouth. In Action Comics, I believe it is. Yeah, we've got more than one character that goes by the name of Superman. So they seem to be kind of embracing all these different iterations of these characters, and I kind of like that, especially as it lends itself to legacy. But I mean, also, I don't know, I'm just kind of interested in them honoring the existence of all these characters. But what's going to be really important to me is how they differentiate them. And I think some books that have characters with shared names and legacies are maybe doing that a little bit better than others. We'll see what happens with Helena Bertinelli. What's interesting in this short story is I understood her to be Catholic. I'm not overly familiar with the character. I've just seen her when she's been in other books and crossovers that I've read over the years. But I understood her to be Catholic, and that to be a significant part of her backstory. And there's a cross pattern on her chest. It's maybe a little de-emphasized in this book or lately, but I felt like that was subtle but definitely present. This white cross, instead of like, say, a bat symbol or something that would evoke the bat symbol. She's got a little something on her belt buckle that kind of actually looks a little more like a Nightwing symbol, but evokes that Batman vibe. But anyway. She seems to be in a very unchristian place. She, in her inner monologue in this story, talks about following a higher voice than these other voices that would be telling her what to do and what she ought to do. And there's a buildup with this motif of her referring to this higher voice that she's following. And it makes me think, oh, she's going to refer to God, probably. And that would be interesting. But the reveal is, she says, higher than Batman, higher than God. And then we get a close-up of her, and the big hero moment is her simply saying, mine. Now, how are we supposed to feel about that? That, yes, that's admirable. She is determined and independent. Or is that supposed to have a dark vibe to it? Like, oh, she's headed down a dark path. Now, as a Christian, I think when we put our voices higher than God's, and even higher than other people who are wiser and more mature than we are, then we are going down a bad path, a self-destructive path that's going to hurt us and hurt others. So I'm just wondering where they're going to take Helena Bertinelli, excuse me, and I'm wondering, is this a change? Because I haven't been following the character, so has she kind of lost her faith or become jaded toward God at some point? If so, what caused that? It says at the end this is going to be continued summer 2023. I don't think it gets more specific than that. If there's an upcoming story that explains the change and suggests a possible arc that will return her to faith, I would find that really surprising and interesting. Even as a Protestant, I would really appreciate seeing an arc that returns her to her Catholic faith. But if not, and they're just going to be building this up, unless they're writing it in a way that is supposed to feel like she's going down a dark path, I'm okay with her abandoning her faith if it's written from the perspective of, oh, this is a dark path. This is a tragic, dark path, and the reader's meant to feel that about this choice. I would be fine with that too. But otherwise, I think I'm probably out, and I'm going to be more interested in the time-lost huntress of the JSA. There's a Doom Patrol story in this issue that's a short tease for Unstoppable Doom Patrol. Apparently that's a new Doom Patrol series that's going to be coming. I will probably just try that one instead. This format, again, feels too abbreviated to give me a sense of whether or not I might enjoy a book that actually has time to breathe featuring these characters. But I've wanted to like the Doom Patrol in the past, these kind of like misfit characters that have weird powers, that they feel, a little bit like the X-Men vibe in the DC universe. But I think the way they've been written and handled has been like kind of off into a weird postmodern vibe that I'm not really into. But I like the basic classic premise of the characters. So I think I'm going to give one issue a try of this new Doom Patrol series. But this one shot, all it does is remind me and says, hey, there's going to be a new Doom Patrol book. But the material here itself does nothing to really won't pull me in. The next story introduces a new character with an origin story that is so compact it felt ridiculous. The final text box says that the character will return in the DC Pride 2023 event, which confirmed my impressions that this was a character that's somewhere in the LGBTQ demographic. I'm curious about the market for this. A rushed and ridiculously, I think, underdeveloped origin. That's when I really give me really establish why I should care about this character. Who are they? What does this change in their life mean to them emotionally? What are they feeling about this? Instead, it's just like, here are the bullet points of what happened, how they got their powers, more to come. And I'm like, I'm just not pulled in at all by that kind of origin story. And just to kind of seemingly prep them for an LGBTQ branded event, which is essentially what it is when you're saying it's the DC Pride, we kind of know what that's referring to. I don't think I would want the equivalent of this being done like as a Christian character. Obviously I don't fall into the LGBTQ plus demographic, but would I want this? Someone might say, well, easy for you to say, Pater. Well, I don't know if I would want this as a Christian branded thing, like a rushed intro story for some Christian branded comic event. No thanks. If this is what they think the LGBTQ market of readers want, I'm really confused. Is it maybe they feel like it's just that important to check that box for that audience, but I don't know. I can't imagine feeling satisfied if I were in their shoes. But admittedly, I'm an outsider, just confused about the thinking here. And then finally, there's a story featuring a new, at least new to me, magic character. and that also has Batgirl, specifically Cassandra Cain, and John Constantine. And again, it feels overcrunched. I'm not sure if they're going to kind of magic eyes Cassandra Cain and kind of put her going forward in a mystical context. That would seem a little weird to me, but maybe they'd be doing that to try to differentiate her. I would rather they would differentiate her among the other Batgirls, like Stephanie Brown, I believe is her name, and of course Barbara Gordon, who seems to be sitting more in the Oracle seat again, which I'm fine with. But I would rather they differentiate her through her character and her personality, which I think they're doing in the Batgirl's book. I'll maybe talk about that at some point. But anyway, Cassandra Cain is a character that I want to catch up on, so I will maybe read. But that's not because of this little story with her here. I've just always kind of been curious, and with Batgirls getting my attention a little bit, it's made me think, oh, I want to go back and read the back issues that introduced her and just get a sense of who she is. And after that, maybe I'll make time to catch up on her story here and appreciate her more in Batgirls. Okay, now we're going to take a look at comics originally published February 21st through 21st and 22nd. And from that group, I have chosen, first off, The Flash 793. And again, they're continuing with this great collection of speedsters all being featured in this book together. Jesse Quick gets some really nice moments. And I was reminded, when she kind of pointed it out to Irie, she's having a heart-to-heart with Wally West's daughter, Irie. And she just kind of points out that she was raised by superheroes. I'm like, that's interesting. We've got the Wally West angle where he starts as a sidekick and then comes into the mantle of the Flash. And that's a really unique thing, specifically in comics. But it's also unique for a character like Jesse Quick to say, I was raised by superheroes. How many characters in comics were raised by superheroes and now are superheroes themselves? So that's a really interesting angle. I'd love to see them play that up a little bit more. And but the conversation that she has with Irie philosophically is very interesting. Now, I've wondered if the writer of this comic might have some overlap in his worldview with Christian thinking. I don't know if he was raised in an environment that was influenced by some form of Christianity or not, but there's just some little fingerprints here and there that overlap with what I would really expect more from a Christian writer. But this moment here definitely doesn't kind of ring true as far as being part of a Christian worldview. Irie is, Jesse is trying to comfort Irie, who's just wondering about her brother and is he going to be okay, and Irie is saying, he's going to be okay. I know that because, your heart is committed to not backing down. That's the same way that your parents are. They're not going to back down. They're going to move heaven and earth to help those that they love. And so you can believe that everything is going to be okay. And she said, that's what's in your heart too. And you've got to be true to yourself is the phrase that's used. And that is a really vague phrase. I mean, I think Hitler was being true to himself. I think there are some people who've done some horrible things, and they're really just being true to who they are, who they have allowed their character to be shaped into. So I think I don't really know what that phrase means. It'd be better to say, be true to the best parts of yourself. I think that'd be a more productive phrase to use, but that's not the one that we typically use. Be true to yourself. But in this case, the specific things she's talking about in that context are worth being true to. This idea of having a heart that's committed to not backing down from a fight, moving heaven and earth to help those they love. So in this case, being true to yourself and following also the way of the heart, which is, Irie says that her grandmother referred to that as the way of the heart. If that's what we're talking about when we say these vague things about your heart and being true to yourself and following your heart and whatever, then that's great. Unfortunately, we're not. This idea is almost never defined, and but I would say this still doesn't mean that everything's going to be okay. Just because your family loves you and they're going to do everything they can to help you doesn't mean that everything's going to be okay. And so, not understanding as we do that not everything in this life will be okay, we need to either lie to ourselves and each other and say, hey, just believe everything's going to be okay, or we need to find contentment and hope despite our circumstances. despite the worst possible eventuality. And I think that's where the promise of resurrection that we have in Jesus really comes into play. And that's why the claims of Jesus are worth examining, and as believers re-examining, so we can be reminded, we really do have good reasons to believe this and believe that we do have a hope that is waiting for us that cannot be taken away by the circumstances of this life. That's something that I've been needing to remind myself of lately, as we've had a whirlwind of different poopy things going on. Anyway, so Linda Park, Wally West's wife, was revealed to be pregnant in the last issue or so, and she appears to be showing already. Is that because they're kind of living in this frozen super speed time for, I don't know, but so I'm wondering, is this baby going to come during this story arc? Is it going to stay a baby? I would understand them maybe wanting to speed up the pregnancy, even though I think there's great stories that could be told if they just keep her pregnant for a couple of years, I think comic book readers understand we just have to shrug about issues related to time anyway. But I can understand them wanting to get through that. I just hope they don't age that baby. Keep that. Let it be like Maggie Simpson and just kind of be the eternal baby, And I think that there could really be some cool, or at least the eternal toddler. I think there could be some really cool stories that are told with that premise. There's some great moments with Impulse and Ace. Sorry if you're watching the video version of this. Normally I would cycle through some images of the comics as I'm going through them. I'm really trying to just stick to bullet points. I'm not doing a very good job. I've got a lot of catching up to do, and I think that'll just slow me down. Anyway, Impulse and Ace, the new Kid Flash, have this really nice moment where they're fighting with each other over, I better actually find this moment. Okay, there's this moment in the story where they're talking about souping up this car with the Speed Force, and Kid Flash, Ace, is like, that's suicide, it's going to be ripped apart, and Barry explains, no, if it's powered by the Speed Force, it's probably going to have a friction barrier like we do, and Wally says, so we don't get killed by a random bug that moves into our path, and then Impulse says, oh, I've actually accidentally swallowed one before, it was terrible, and Ace says, no, you didn't, that's impossible. Because of the friction filter and stuff. And Impulse says, for you. And Ace says, I could swallow a bug while running if I wanted to. And Impulse says, prove it, And so I love this dynamic where it's like, okay, great. So again, we're differentiating these characters. What is one of the key things that makes them different? They're kids, first and foremost. I mean, I think the very last line, Barry says, boys, but also with their own individual characters. Impulse is just like rattling off just blah, blah, blah. He's just speaking in a very impulsive way. And Ace is like, no, that doesn't work with the rules, because he's been a much more dedicated student of the Speed Force by far than Impulse has been, And I think he has a little bit of pride about that too, saying, I could swallow a bug while running if I wanted to. And Impulse is just, the more immature of the two. And so these are and you only needed one panel to have this moment. And so that's why it's like, I just don't have patience for comics that aren't willing to give at least one panel like this to some kind of a character building moment, So, really appreciated that. Then there's this cool montage where they're all kind of getting ready to for the big plan to come together. And what's cool about it is you see these different generations of Flashes kind of gravitating toward each other. Ace and Impulse are kind of grouped up, Barry and Wally, and then you briefly see Max Mercury and Jay Garrick kind of partnered up, and then you also see Irie and Jesse Quick, which later on, Jesse kind of refers to them as the Flash Girls, and then they have this little motto where they say Flash Girls forever, and so I just love this kind of this generational montage, this sense of legacy and family and a wide range of ages. It reminds me of some of the things that I really loved about Jeff Johns' run on JSA. And I think what he also did some of, but was certainly done before him by Mark Waid in the pages of The Flash. Another great little character moment is when they're getting ready to go on the big mission. Everyone's got their assignments, and Irie's like, what about me? And they're like, you stay here, you guard the frozen heroes. That's super duper important, And she's kind of feeling like, I don't think that's important. And Jesse says, what would happen if someone broke in and stole the greatest hero on Earth? And she said, Dad's, meaning Wally, Dad's the greatest hero on Earth. And I just love that. As a dad, you want your kids to think the world of you, And then in the very next panel, it's almost skipped over. Wally just kind of, a little bit embarrassed, says, I mean, and then he gets cut off, and Jesse says, the point is, And so it's just a great little moment there, I think, really well, that really represents well what a dad wants, the dynamic you would love to have in a family. So I just appreciate that little snapshot there. As we get closer to the end of the issue, we see that Barry's in a dark place. Wally and Barry are talking about Iris as though she is dead, and that's still up in the air as far as I'm concerned. I didn't understand that to be the case. They're still in this hyperspeed mode, and we don't know if Iris is actually dead or if she's just at the cusp of death and she can still be saved. I mean, the way they're talking about it, I'm like, am I meant to be thinking that she is irrevocably dead? I don't understand why they are talking this way. Is that just the writer trying to pull one over on us and make us feel this moment before they bring her back? Or is she in fact dead? I'm really confused. If she is in fact dead, that will feel almost like a death that, I don't know, I guess they did try to give it its proper dramatic due when Barry screamed "no" to the sky, but I think as readers that are familiar with The Flash and super speed and stuff like that, we're all probably rightly thinking, well, she's not necessarily dead. So if she ends up really being dead, it'll be kind of a weird transition. I hope she's not, because they were about to propose to each other, it turns out, and I would love to see that marriage restored at long last, finally, after all the mess of the New 52 and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, and then there's an interesting moment that is a subtle, one of the more subtle examples to me of like writing that's just like, this is interesting. Linda and Jesse Quick are working together to kind of keep some doors open so that the super speed car can get through, or whatever the plan is. I can't remember at this point. But Linda says, the diversion worked. Thank the Lord for your super strength, Jesse. And it's just interesting. I thank the Lord. That's at the very least an old-fashioned kind of expression. I would expect more today, even from someone having a secular worldview. They would say, thank God. That's just kind of like a mindless expression that many people use that have no particular belief in God. But thank the Lord is a bit more specific. That definitely has an association in my mind with specifically Christian theology and, or at least Christian culture in some sense. So again, it's just one of these little things. It's death by a thousand cuts that are all adding up. I'm just like, this writer seems to be coming from a slightly different place on some of these worldview things, maybe, and some of these culture things than a number of his peers. So I find that interesting, and we'll continue to keep an eye on it and see kind of where it goes. But at the end of this book, at the end of this story, at this issue, excuse me, I'm reminded, I love this. It's not just because I love the Flash. I do love the Flash. I've loved him for years. But I look at this and I'm like, how does a book with a bunch of people that all basically have the same power set remain interesting? And the answer is character. They are differentiated not by their super abilities, but by their personalities, by what drives them, by what they care about, by what their flaws are, And so I'm very on board for what's going on in The Flash these days. And The Flash, 793, was certainly a great example of that. Next up, Lazarus Planet Omega #1, which brings the whole Lazarus Planet event to a close. I'm going to spend less time on this because I went way too long on The Flash, but there is basically a panel that sums up my feelings about the bookends of this story and the one-shots that came between them. Zatanna, while they're recovering from having basically won the day, is helping one of the Robins. Is it Tim Drake, or I can't remember, maybe it's Damien. Anyway, she's helping this Robin up. And he says, care to tell me what just happened here? And Zatanna says, we're not sure ourselves, frankly. And I'm like, yeah, I had trouble following this because a number of characters I wasn't familiar with, and it all seemed very rushed and compacted. And then another character says, all we can be certain of is that going forward, magic as we know it will not behave precisely as it once did. And that says to me, okay, so in a nutshell, that's probably what this whole event was for. It was just to change the status quo of magic and give a little refresh, give writers, editors permission to kind of revamp, refresh various mystical characters and goings on in the DC universe. Okay, that's fine. I don't think we needed all this hullabaloo. I suspect that a number of the stories contained in the one-shots are in some ways setups for characters that are going to be brought into the spotlight for Dawn of DC, because I think Dawn of DC is not just about reestablishing existing characters, but I think it is meant to be a springboard for some new characters. I'm not sure. That's still unclear to me, but we'll see. But this story, I mean, it truly resolves and continues in Batman versus Robin number 5, because there's still some unresolved stuff going on with Batman and Robin, Damian, and that's what started this whole thing. A fight between them created or led to the big explosion of the Lazarus volcano that caused all this stuff to go on and magic to get messed up, and yet still at the end of this, they're saying continued in Batman versus Robin number 5, because Batman still has glowing green eyes, so I guess he's possessed by a demon or something like that. So in summary, as a crossover event supposedly laying the foundation for Dawn of DC, this felt to me like a mess of an experience that lacked beginning because it started with Batman versus Robin, lacked a middle because the various one-shots were overly truncated and barely connected, and also lacked an end because it requires Batman versus Robin to resolve and leaves a lot of threads hanging that are presumably going to be picked up at some point in Dawn of DC. So it felt, to me, completely like a publishing device rather than a story. So I really hope that Dawn of DC stands on its own and just as an initiative feels and plays out very differently than this one did. Finally, from this particular week of DC Publishing, we had Superman number 1. Yes, they're restarting the numbering again for Dawn of DC. And some interesting stuff going on here. At first, you get the impression that Lex Luthor is in Superman's head. Later on in the issue, we really interestingly learn that no, Superman is always listening. Lex Luthor's off in prison. He's been put in jail. But Superman reveals that there's a small number of people in the world that he has just learned to tune his ears to always be listening for whenever he can. Lois is one of them. I think he said maybe his parents and their son John. And Lex Luthor is another one. And I found that very interesting, and it's like, that makes a ton of sense. Why would you not just always kind of be tuned in, trying to be listening for his particular voice, you know? And so that was cool, and I love how Lex Luthor still seems to be functioning as a manipulator, an orchestrator from behind prison walls. I mean, it kind of reminded me, I was like, you know, at first I was like, I don't want him to be caught, I don't want him to be a criminal, I like him being a businessman and whatever, but maybe I'm kind of ready for them to move on. I guess what I'm relieved at, though, is that despite changing locations, he's not changing what he's doing, which makes perfect sense to me. With a guy like Lex Luthor, I think we'll probably learn at some point he's only in prison because he wants to be, you know? Maybe, I mean, I didn't read the story that got him there, so I don't know how he got there, but as far as like why he's in there 1 second longer than he wants to be, you know, I think that is probably going to be revealed at some point. Livewire is kind of the enemy in this issue, and she, of course, was originally created for the animated Superman series back in the late 90s. And they've reimagined her. This isn't the first time she's appeared in the comics since the animated series, but they've reimagined her at some point, or maybe here for the first time, as a podcaster, which makes perfect sense to me. They reference cancel culture and how she's outraged because, like, her contracts were taken away from her, I assume because she did some dastardly Livewire things or something. I don't know. But I just think, yeah, that's a nice, subtle little update. Of course, she wouldn't be a shock jockey today. She would be, you know, a podcaster like Joe Rogan or something like that. Lois Lane is editor-in-chief in this kind of new status quo that they're starting off Superman number 1 with Perry White apparently on sabbatical. I'm good with that. I like the idea of just saying, you know what, he's on sabbatical. So that's a clear indication this isn't lasting forever. Writers are smart enough. We know this isn't going to last forever. Lois needs to be out there hunting down stories. And in fact, there's this great character moment where she's like, I need to be hunting a story. If I'm in here for too long, I'm going to eat an intern, you know, which I thought was hilarious. Excuse me. And Superman's secret identity is back as part of this new status quo that they're establishing. I don't know if I've read yet how that happened. but I don't care. I think he needs to have his secret identity. I've talked at length about why that is in the past. Briefly, I'll just say again, Superman from the beginning was meant to be the ultimate nerd fantasy for people who feel overlooked and underappreciated. What if underneath this underappreciated, overlooked person, there was actually this amazing person that no one realized was there? That is the nerd fantasy. And I feel like they've been failing to play that up to the degree that they get Clark Kent wrong, making him more of a GQ model or whatever. I think Superman is too bulky. I think they could trim down some of his bulk so he could more convincingly be a nerd and someone that's overlooked and stuff. So, but at least having the Clark Kent identity is a step in a better direction compared to certainly getting rid of it. Mercy Graves, which is Lex Luthor's bodyguard and kind of, I think, second in command, effectively. She's still in constant contact with Luthor. As I said before, he's basically still doing his Lex Luthor thing, just in different clothes and in a different room. So, and Lex is claiming that they're on the same side. He's constantly talking to Superman because he knows that Superman is listening, which I think is great. So it looks like even though he's behind bars, he's still going to be very much a part of the stories going on, a part of Superman, what's going on with him, because he'll just constantly be muttering things in Superman's ear. I think that's great. So again, some great opportunity for characters to be butting heads, personalities to be butting heads. That's what really makes writing strong for me. And he's claiming to Superman that they're on the same side and that Superman is now facing not Superman's enemies, but Lex Luthor's. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where they go with that. I'm really on board with the premise here, with the status quo changes. Consider me interested, and I'm at least going to stick with this for a few more issues to see if it continues to keep me hooked. Finally, we'll take a look at comics originally published on February 28th, 2023 to wrap up comics published in February. From that group, I've chosen Action Comics 1052 and Stargirl The Lost Children number 4. The Action Comics issue continues with the format that's been established before now in 1051 with 3 short stories. Again, I'm not really into these short stories because it just tends to condense things too much and not give enough opportunity for things to breathe. Although, as I said, sometimes all you need is one panel, and so even with these short stories, I still feel like it's not an unreasonable expectation to give me some of those character beats. But I can understand they might not want to give time to that. There's 3 short stories continuing the established format. You've got the present-day super family, which you can see on the front issue, and they're all, for some reason, seemingly crammed into one apartment living together, along with 2 War World survivors that aren't even part of, they're not even, I guess have they been adopted kind of by Lois and Clark? I'm not really clear on that, but anyway, lots of people crammed into a small apartment. You've got a flashback story featuring young Jonathan Kent, which I appreciate, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then you've got a present-day storyline about super psychotherapy with the characters Omen and Power Girl. So, going through these one at a time. First off, the Super Family is up against Metallo in their story, and it still feels way too crammed. Over in the Flash, they get an entire issue for this large group of speedsters to share. But here you get far less space. And some of these characters in the Superman family barely speak, and none feel represented meaningfully in terms of personality. So I would rather they would have, in 1051, said, okay, here are the characters we're going to be drawing from throughout the run of this arc, just to give us a heads up. But then as soon as you get to 1052, let's just zoom in on, say, 2 or 3 characters for this little short part of the arc at a time. But I just feel like they're not, I don't know. I don't know. I'm really feeling disinterested in that story arc. Second, the young Jonathan Kent storyline stuff, I want young John, but it feels bittersweet as a flashback. On a meta level, I'm like, well, maybe they're seeing what the audience interest is in this version of John, and if they get a lot of positive feedback, they'll find a way to de-age him again. That's what I would really like them to do, and just keep him the eternal child like the Simpson children are. because I think there's so much story there, but I've said enough about that in the past. So it feels bittersweet, and also, again, the pacing feels rushed because of the abbreviated format, which works against the strength of a young John storyline, namely character. What's different about him and his personality, given the age that he is at? I think that's that premise lends itself to character-driven storytelling, and there's just not really time for it, I don't think. And then the third story with Omen and Power Girl and the super psychotherapy. It looks like this quote-unquote therapy is going to continue to play out as oversimplified adventures in symbolic mental landscapes, where they enter people's minds, but they do so kind of like still looking like themselves. And in the last issue, they were like fighting whatever the emotional problem was. They were almost fighting like this embodied monster version of or something. That's not exactly what it was, but it was something along those lines, where it turns into just kind of another superhero rock'em sock'em exchange on the mental plane or something like that. And so there's not really a rock'em sock'em fight in this one, but it's still these kind of mental issues, it looks like, that are going to be resolved by imagined fist fighting or just questing and adventuring and stuff like that, and the usual superhero action stuff, which, I guess if that's what you want, then that's what you'll get. But for a premise that's so adjacent to mental health and these really deep, rich, emotional experiences that we have as people, I'd really like more weight given to what they are doing rather than reducing them to this abstract parallel of superhero adventuring and fights and stuff like that. Bottom line is, as far as Action Comics goes, I'm dropping this one until these current arcs are resolved at least, and then I'll check in with it again in hopes that they will change the format and the overall content of this book. But right now, I'm out. Let's see here. Next up is Stargirl and the Lost Children #4, and I did read the first 3 issues of this to get caught up on what's going on. Basically, it's a series, or rather a mini-series, going to be 6 issues, about Stargirl, who, if you're not familiar with her, is a legacy hero who has the mantle of, I think, Star Boy, or Starman and Stripesy from the Golden Age were 2 heroes, and she kind of takes her name and her powers from there's a connection to that, and actually a family connection to those characters from the Golden Age. And she is, in this story, discovering that there are numerous kid sidekicks from the Golden Age everyone has forgotten about. So it's kind of said hyperbolically that back in the day, in the Golden Age and the Silver Age, every superhero had a sidekick. Well, that wasn't literally true, but this story kind of proposes that it pretty much was, but there's just a bunch of them that we've forgotten about and that no one remembers ever existed. And they're trapped on an island in a pocket dimension outside of the multiverse. And so it looks poised, this story, to quote-unquote return these characters to modern-day DC. I say quote-unquote return because maybe a few of them are actually characters that existed in DC real-world publishing history, but most of them, I think, are new inventions. Maybe all of them, I'm not sure. I haven't done my research well enough. But I've researched some to see that, oh, this is a new character. Oh, this is a new character, So at least some, if not all of them, are new inventions, but they're created very much in the style, for the most part, of characters in the Golden Age. And so they feel very out of time. And so it's interesting. So yeah, as I said, it looks poised to either return these characters to modern day DC, in which case, who knows what storytelling could be done there as these kind of characters that are out of time and adjusting to the modern day and technology and culture changes. Or maybe it's going to reinsert them in their home time periods in a way that will then have major impact on DC continuity. That seems less likely to me. It would be an interesting choice to do with maybe 1 or 2 of them. But I think if all of them get dropped that way, it could have major ripple effects that would just result in another confusing reset, almost, of the DC universe. So I'm betting on them returning in the sense of coming to present day. We'll see when the story's done. This is written by Jeff Johns, who loves Golden Age characters and has a knack for reinvigorating them, I think. He's also writing the new JSA series, so I think this is clearly a lead-in to that, and I can't wait to see where this goes. I think it has so much potential, along with Justice Society of America, to be a revival of some of my favorite kinds of stories in DC history written by Jeff Johns, specifically those that fudge history, because he does fudge history and say, we remembered that wrong. It's a little bit, actually, this is kind of what happened before, but he usually goes light enough or comes up with some kind of justification that I can roll with it. So he fudges history, and yet it's clear that Geoff Johns loves history. Even as he likes to kind of massage it and reshape it a bit, it's clear that he loves pulling from these previous time periods of publishing history and finding justifications to refresh those ideas, refresh those characters, and bring them back and give them new richness and depth. And he loves the history of the DC universe. He cares about legacy, and so the stories that he writes about these kinds of characters tend to focus on those things: history, legacy, families, both found families and traditional families, with wide age groups represented. One of the things that I thought was such a shame about the New 52 was all of the characters older than 55 were like wiped from existence or de-aged or something like that, and so all we had was a bunch of 20-somethings ruling the world, and no characters with age and wisdom and experience for them to learn from. And so I love the idea of these older veteran characters returning and potentially serving that role of mentor in the DC universe. I think that's something that will make for better stories in the DC universe, and I think it's a good model for us because we need mentors in real life, and sometimes they can be hard to find if we've been hurt by people older than us, people in authority over us. But man, when you can find those mature, particularly in a Christian context, when you can find mature believers who have been living out their faith longer than you and I have, and we can learn from them, they are such a tremendous resource and a support for us, and help us to grow and to be lifted up and sustained as we face various difficult things in life. So just so excited about where this might go. But yeah, I think at long last, those are all the thoughts that I have about DC Comics for now. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions, as always, in the comments below. Remember to check out christiangeekcentral.com for tons more content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
christiangeekcentral.com